Behind the golden gates of Ravencrest Palace, where centuries of tradition meet modern scandal, a single phone call threatens to shatter the most powerful monarchy in Europe. Queen Isabella had always believed that love conquered all, but when a recording surfaces revealing her husband King Alexander's most trusted advisor plotting against the crown, she must choose between protecting her marriage and saving her kingdom. In a world where every whisper echoes through marble halls and every secret becomes a weapon, one woman's decision will determine whether a thousand-year dynasty survives or crumbles into dust. The crown jewels may glitter, but some truths cut deeper than diamonds. Queen Isabella's silk gloves trembled as she held the small recording device. The ornate study around her, with its towering bookshelves and ancestral portraits, seemed to close in like a gilded prison. The voice emerging from the tiny speaker was unmistakably familiar, yet the words being spoken were so shocking that she found herself replaying the recording for the third time. The Queen must be removed from the equation, came the crisp, aristocratic tone of Lady Victoria Ashford, the King's most trusted advisor and Isabella's closest friend for over 2 decades. Alexander is too weak to make the necessary decisions. The monarchy needs strength, not sentiment. Isabella's heart hammered against her chest as she listened to Victoria's voice continue with cold calculation. The phone records I've obtained prove that Isabella has been secretly funding opposition groups. With this evidence, we can force her abdication and position Alexander as a stronger, more decisive ruler. The recording crackled with static before another voice joined the conversation. Isabella recognized it immediately as Lord Edmund Blackwood, the Minister of Royal Affairs, whose family had served the crown for generations. The evidence you fabricated is convincing, Victoria, but are you certain the king will agree to this plan? Edmund's voice carried a note of uncertainty. Alexander will have no choice, Victoria replied with chilling confidence. Once I present him with the fabricated evidence of Isabella's supposed treason, his loyalty to the crown will override his personal feelings. He's always been more devoted to duty than to love. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The woman she had trusted with her deepest secrets, who had stood beside her through every crisis of her reign, was orchestrating her downfall with lies and manufactured evidence. The recording had been delivered to her private chambers that morning by a mysterious messenger who vanished before the guards could question him. No note accompanied it, just the damning evidence of betrayal from those closest to the throne. Rising from her chair, Isabella moved to the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens where she and Alexander had walked hand in hand just yesterday evening, discussing their plans for the upcoming state visit from neighboring Algeria. The autumn leaves danced in the crisp air, their golden hues reflecting the late afternoon sunlight. Everything appeared peaceful and normal, yet beneath the surface, a conspiracy was unfolding that threatened to destroy everything she held dear. The Queen's mind raced as she considered her options. Confronting Victoria directly would alert the conspirators that their plot had been exposed, potentially forcing them to accelerate their timeline. Going to Alexander seemed like the obvious choice, but Victoria's words echoed in her mind about his unwavering devotion to duty over love. Would he believe his wife over his most trusted advisor? Isabella had married Alexander 15 years ago in what began as a political alliance between their nations but had blossomed into genuine love. Their marriage had weathered numerous storms, from public scandals to political upheavals, but they had always faced challenges together. The thought that fabricated evidence might turn him against her felt like a dagger to her heart. Walking to her private safe, Isabella retrieved a folder containing correspondence she had hoped never to use. Inside were letters from her brother Prince Marcus, who had been exiled from the neighboring kingdom of Aldoria 3 years earlier following a failed attempt to expose corruption within their royal court. Marcus had warned her repeatedly about the danger of trusting anyone completely in the treacherous world of royal politics. One letter, written just 6 months ago, now seemed prophetic in its warning. Dearest sister, the crown makes us targets for those who crave power. Watch carefully those who claim to serve you most faithfully, for they often harbor the deepest ambitions. Trust is a luxury that queens cannot afford. At the time, Isabella had dismissed Marcus's warnings as the bitter words of a man whose own trust had been betrayed. Now, she realized that his paranoia might have been wisdom in disguise. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside her study made Isabella quickly hide the recording device in a secret compartment within her desk. She had discovered this hidden panel as a child while exploring the palace, never imagining she would one day use it to conceal evidence of treason. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "Your Majesty," came the familiar voice of Sarah, her personal secretary, and one of the few people in the palace whom Isabella still trusted completely. "Enter," Isabella called, composing herself and moving away from the desk. Sarah stepped into the room, carrying a silver tray laden with afternoon tea and a selection of documents requiring the Queen's attention. Her loyal secretary had served the royal household for over a decade, starting as a junior clerk and working her way up through sheer competence and unwavering discretion. "The schedule for tomorrow's charity gala has been finalized," Sarah reported, setting down the tray and handing Isabella a leather portfolio. "Lady Victoria has requested a private audience with you before the event to discuss security arrangements." The mention of Victoria's name sent a chill down Isabella's spine, but she maintained her composure. "What time does Lady Victoria wish to meet?" 9 o'clock in the morning, Your Majesty." She seemed quite insistent about the urgency of the matter. Isabella nodded, her mind already formulating a plan. "Please confirm the appointment, Sarah. And could you discreetly arrange for me to review the guest list for tomorrow evening? I want to ensure we haven't overlooked any potential security concerns." Sarah's eyes showed a flicker of curiosity at the unusual request, but her years of service had taught her not to question the Queen's instructions. "Of course, Your Majesty. I'll have the complete list delivered to your chambers within the hour." After Sarah departed, Isabella returned to the window, watching as gardeners tended to the rose bushes below. The flowers were beginning their final bloom before winter, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the dark thoughts clouding her mind. She thought about the upcoming charity gala, an annual event that brought together nobles, politicians, and wealthy benefactors to raise funds for children's hospitals across the kingdom. The irony was not lost on her that Victoria planned to present fabricated evidence of treason at an event dedicated to helping innocent children. The symbolism felt particularly cruel, given that Isabella had been instrumental in establishing the Children's Hospital charity 15 years earlier, during her first year as queen. As evening approached, Isabella heard the familiar sound of Alexander's footsteps in the corridor. Her husband's distinctive gait, confident yet unhurried, had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat over their years of marriage. The door opened, and the king entered with his characteristic warm smile. "My dear," Alexander said, crossing the room to embrace his wife. "You look troubled. Has something happened?" Isabella melted into her husband's arms, drawing comfort from his presence while wrestling with the decision of whether to reveal what she had discovered. Alexander's dark hair showed streaks of silver at the temples, evidence of the weight of his responsibilities, but his eyes remained as kind and intelligent as they had been on their wedding day. "I've been thinking about tomorrow night," Isabella said carefully, choosing her words with precision. "Something feels different about this year's gala. I can't quite put my finger on it." Alexander studied his wife's face with concern. After 15 years of marriage, he had learned to read her moods and recognized when something was genuinely troubling her. "Would you like me to review the security arrangements personally? Victoria has been handling most of the details, but if you're concerned." The mention of Victoria's involvement in the security arrangements sent another wave of alarm through Isabella. If Victoria was planning to present fabricated evidence, controlling the security would give her the perfect opportunity to manipulate the situation. "Perhaps that would be wise," Isabella agreed. "I'd feel more comfortable knowing you've personally overseen every detail." Alexander nodded, pulling his wife closer. "Consider it done. Your instincts have never led us astray before. If something feels wrong, we should trust that feeling." As they stood together in the fading light of the study, Isabella felt torn between the desire to confess everything she had learned and the fear that doing so might play directly into Victoria's hands. The recording device hidden in her desk seemed to burn like a secret fire, its revelations threatening to consume everything she held dear. The evening shadows grew longer as Isabella wrestled with her decision, knowing that tomorrow would bring a confrontation that could either save her crown or destroy her marriage. In the distance, church bells chimed the hour, their solemn tones echoing across the ancient city that had been ruled by Alexander's family for over 1,000 years. The weight of history, tradition, and responsibility pressed down upon Isabella's shoulders as she realized that her next moves would determine not just her own fate, but the future of the monarchy itself. The game of royal politics was about to begin in earnest, and she was no longer certain who her true allies were in the treacherous world behind the palace walls. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ravencrest Palace as Queen Isabella prepared for her meeting with Lady Victoria. She had spent most of the night analyzing every detail of the recording, memorizing each inflection in Victoria's voice and the calculated coldness of her words. The fabricated evidence mentioned in the conversation weighed heavily on Isabella's mind as she considered her strategy. Isabella chose her attire carefully for the meeting, selecting a deep burgundy dress that projected both authority and elegance. The sapphire necklace around her neck had belonged to her grandmother, a reminder of the generations of strong women who had worn the crown before her. Today, she would need to channel their strength and wisdom. Sarah arrived promptly with the guest list for the evening's charity gala. As Isabella reviewed the names, she noticed several additions that hadn't been there in previous years. Lord Edmund Blackwood's name appeared prominently, along with several other nobles whose loyalty to the crown had been questionable in recent months. Sarah, Isabella said carefully, these additional guests on the list, when were they added? Lady Victoria made those additions 3 days ago, Your Majesty. She said they were important potential donors who had expressed interest in supporting the children's hospital charity. 3 days ago. Isabella's mind raced as she calculated the timing. The recording she had received was dated just 4 days earlier, meaning Victoria had been moving quickly to implement whatever plan she had discussed with Lord Edmund. I see. And, as Lady Victoria reviewed the security protocols with Captain Morrison, Sarah consulted her notes. Yes, Your Majesty. She met with him yesterday evening for nearly 2 hours. She also requested that several additional guards be assigned to the main ballroom during the event. The pieces of Victoria's plan were becoming clearer. Additional security would provide more witnesses to whatever scene Victoria intended to create, while the carefully selected guest list would ensure that the right people were present to hear whatever accusations she planned to make. A knock at the door interrupted Isabella's thoughts. Your Majesty, came the voice of Captain Morrison, the head of palace security. Lady Victoria has arrived for your meeting. Isabella took a deep breath, drawing upon years of diplomatic training to maintain her composure. Please escort her to the Blue Salon. I'll be there momentarily. As Captain Morrison departed, Isabella retrieved a small recording device of her own from her jewelry box. If Victoria was planning to use fabricated evidence against her, Isabella intended to document whatever transpired during their meeting. The Blue Salon was one of the palace's more intimate spaces, decorated with delicate French furnishings and paintings depicting peaceful countryside scenes. It was here that Isabella typically held private meetings with friends and trusted advisors. The irony of meeting with Victoria in this particular room, given what she now knew about her friend's true intentions, was not lost on the Queen. Lady Victoria Ashford stood by the tall windows, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her posture radiating the confidence of someone born into nobility. She had been a beauty in her youth, and, even at 55, she maintained an air of elegance that commanded respect. Her family had served the crown for 3 generations, and Victoria herself had been instrumental in helping Isabella navigate the complexities of royal life during her early years as queen. Victoria, Isabella greeted her with a warm smile that required considerable effort to maintain. Thank you for coming so early. I understand you have concerns about tonight's security arrangements. Victoria turned from the window, her expression serious. Isabella, my dear, I'm afraid we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Please sit down. The 2 women settled into opposite chairs, the small table between them laden with fine china and fresh flowers from the palace gardens. Victoria's demeanor was that of someone preparing to deliver difficult news, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. What kind of situation? Isabella asked, proud of how steady her voice remained despite the racing of her heart. Victoria reached into her handbag and withdrew a manila folder. I've discovered some disturbing information that I felt you should be aware of before tonight's gala. It concerns potential security threats to the crown. Isabella watched as Victoria opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be official documents and photographs. The Queen recognized some of the letterhead as belonging to government agencies, though she couldn't immediately determine their authenticity from across the table. Over the past several weeks, Victoria began, her voice taking on a tone of reluctant authority, I've been conducting a discreet investigation into some unusual financial activities that came to my attention. What I discovered has deeply troubled me. Victoria slid one of the documents across the table. Isabella picked it up, recognizing it as a bank statement bearing her personal account information. However, the transactions listed were completely unfamiliar to her. Large sums of money appeared to have been transferred to organizations she had never heard of. I don't understand, Isabella said, studying the document more carefully. These transactions, I have no knowledge of them. I was hoping you would say that, Victoria replied, though her expression remained grave. Because what I've uncovered suggests that someone has been using your financial accounts to fund activities that could be considered treasonous. Isabella's blood ran cold as she realized this was exactly what Victoria had referenced in the recording. The fabricated evidence was being presented with Oscar-worthy performance of concern and loyalty. Treasonous activities? Isabella repeated, setting the document down carefully. What exactly are you suggesting, Victoria? Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The organizations receiving these funds have been identified as groups seeking to undermine the monarchy. They've been spreading propaganda designed to turn public opinion against the crown and, specifically, against your reign. The accusation hung in the air between them like a poisonous cloud. Isabella felt a surge of anger at the audacity of the lies, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. This was clearly the opening move in Victoria's plan to force her abdication. That's impossible, Isabella said firmly. I would never fund any organization opposed to the crown. These documents must be falsified. Victoria's expression shifted to one of pained disappointment. Isabella, I understand this is difficult to accept, but the evidence is overwhelming. Look at this. Another document emerged from the folder, this one appearing to be a letter written on royal stationery. Isabella's heart sank as she recognized what looked like her own handwriting, though she was certain she had never written the words contained within the letter. The document purported to be correspondence between Isabella and a political activist named David Sterling, discussing plans to modernize the monarchy through gradual reform that the people will accept. The language was carefully crafted to sound treasonous, while maintaining plausible deniability. Victoria, Isabella said slowly, someone has gone to extraordinary lengths to create very convincing forgeries. But, I assure you, I have never written any such correspondence, nor have I authorized any financial transactions to unknown organizations. Victoria sat back in her chair, her performance of reluctant duty continuing. I was afraid you might say that, Isabella. The alternative explanation is that someone very close to you has gained access to your accounts and is acting without your knowledge. This was clearly Victoria's escape route, Isabella realized. If challenged on the evidence, Victoria could claim that someone else was responsible while still maintaining that the Queen was unfit to rule due to the security breaches. Who else has access to my financial information? Isabella asked, playing along with Victoria's script while mentally recording every word for future use. Very few people, Victoria replied. Myself, Alexander, your personal secretary Sarah, and the Minister of Financial Affairs. We would need to conduct a thorough investigation to determine who might be responsible. Isabella noticed that Victoria had cleverly included herself in the list of suspects, providing another layer of plausible deniability. The sophistication of the plan was impressive, even as its betrayal cut deeply into Isabella's heart. What do you recommend we do about this situation? Isabella asked. Victoria's expression grew even more serious. Given the sensitive nature of these revelations, I believe we need to inform Alexander immediately. As king, he needs to be aware of potential threats to the crown, regardless of their source. And what about tonight's gala? That's my primary concern, Victoria said, leaning forward again. If word of these financial irregularities were to become public during such a high-profile event, the damage to the monarchy could be irreparable. We need to take preemptive action. Isabella felt the trap closing around her. Victoria was setting the stage to present this fabricated evidence to Alexander and, potentially, to the assembled guests at the gala. The public nature of the revelation would make denial difficult and force immediate action. What kind of preemptive action? Isabella asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. I think you should consider temporarily stepping back from your royal duties while we investigate this matter thoroughly, Victoria said, her voice filled with manufactured compassion. It would protect both you and the crown from further damage. There it was. The suggestion of abdication, presented as a protective measure rather than a coup. Victoria's political instincts were razor-sharp, Isabella had to admit, even as she despised the woman's betrayal. Step back from my duties, Isabella repeated slowly. You mean abdicate? Temporarily, Victoria emphasized. Just until we can clear your name and identify the real culprit behind these financial irregularities. Isabella stood and moved to the window, needing a moment to process the full scope of Victoria's audacity. The gardens below showed the first signs of autumn, with gardeners preparing the flower beds for winter. The sight reminded her of the cycles of nature, of death and rebirth, of the importance of timing in all things. Turning back to Victoria, Isabella made her decision. I appreciate your concern, Victoria, and I understand the gravity of the situation. However, I won't be stepping back from my duties based on documents that I know to be falsified. Victoria's carefully maintained expression flickered for just a moment, revealing a flash of frustration before she regained control. Isabella, you must understand how this looks. The evidence is quite compelling, even if you maintain your innocence. Then, we'll need to prove my innocence through proper investigation, Isabella said firmly. I suggest we involve the Royal Investigation Bureau immediately. They have the expertise to determine the authenticity of these documents. The suggestion clearly caught Victoria off guard. The Royal Investigation Bureau was an independent agency that answered directly to the Crown and had a reputation for thoroughness and integrity. Their involvement would likely expose the fabricated nature of the evidence. Of course, Victoria said after a moment's hesitation. Though I'm concerned about the timeline. If we wait for a full investigation, the damage to the monarchy's reputation could be extensive. Isabella smiled, recognizing Victoria's attempt to rush the process. The monarchy has survived for over 1,000 years, Victoria. It can survive a proper investigation into these serious allegations. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Victoria growing increasingly insistent on immediate action and Isabella remaining firm in her refusal to step down without proper investigation. By the time Victoria departed, both women understood that the battle lines had been drawn. As soon as Victoria left the palace, Isabella retrieved the recording device she had hidden and listened to the conversation. Victoria's performance had been masterful, but knowing the truth behind her motivations made every word ring with calculated deception. Isabella's next move would be crucial. She needed to inform Alexander of the situation without allowing Victoria to frame the narrative first. The evening's gala was only hours away, and Isabella suspected that Victoria would use the public setting to maximum advantage if given the opportunity. The Queen walked to her private study and began composing a letter to her brother Marcus in exile. If Victoria's plan succeeded, Isabella would need allies outside the kingdom, and Marcus's experience with political betrayal might prove invaluable in the battles ahead. King Alexander sat in his private office, reviewing state papers when Isabella entered unannounced. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting a golden glow across the rich mahogany furniture and oil paintings of his ancestors. His wife's expression immediately told him something was seriously wrong. Alexander, we need to talk, Isabella said, closing the door firmly behind her and engaging the privacy lock that prevented any interruptions. The king set aside his papers, giving his full attention to his wife. In their 15 years of marriage, Isabella had rarely looked so troubled. Her usual composure was intact, but Alexander could see the tension in the way she held her shoulders and the unusual brightness in her eyes that suggested barely contained emotion. What's happened? Alexander asked, rising from his desk and moving to join her on the comfortable sofa near the fireplace. Isabella withdrew the small recording device from her purse, setting it on the coffee table between them. Before I play this for you, I need you to know that everything we've built together, everything we believe about the people closest to us, is about to change. Alexander studied the device with growing concern. Isabella, you're frightening me. What's on that recording? A conversation between Victoria and Lord Edmund, discussing a plan to force my abdication using fabricated evidence of treason. Isabella's voice was steady, but Alexander could hear the pain beneath her controlled tone. The king's face went pale. That's impossible. Victoria has been our closest advisor for over a decade. She helped us through the succession crisis, the economic reforms, the border disputes with Valdoria. I know, Isabella said softly. That's what makes this betrayal so devastating. She pressed play, and Victoria's voice filled the private office with its calculated coldness. Alexander listened in stunned silence as the woman he had trusted implicitly discussed destroying his marriage and manipulating his devotion to duty. The king will have no choice, Victoria's recorded voice declared with chilling confidence. Once I present him with the fabricated evidence of Isabella's supposed treason, his loyalty to the crown will override his personal feelings. He's always been more devoted to duty than to love. Alexander's hands clenched into fists as the recording continued. The casual way Victoria discussed manipulating his emotions and loyalty felt like a physical blow. When the recording ended, silence filled the room like a heavy blanket. When did you receive this? Alexander asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. Yesterday morning. Someone delivered it anonymously to my private chambers. Isabella reached for her husband's hand, finding comfort in his familiar touch. Victoria came to see me this morning, just as the recording predicted. She presented me with fabricated bank statements and forged correspondence, claiming I've been funding anti-monarchy groups. Alexander stood abruptly, pacing to the window. 15 years, Isabella. 15 years I've trusted that woman with our most sensitive information, our private concerns, our fears about ruling effectively. She knows every weakness, every pressure point. There's more, Isabella said quietly. The guest list for tonight's gala has been carefully manipulated. Victoria added several nobles whose loyalty has been questionable, and she's arranged for additional security that could serve as witnesses to whatever public scene she's planning. The king turned back to his wife, his expression hardening with resolve. We need to contact the Royal Investigation Bureau immediately. If Victoria has fabricated evidence, they'll be able to prove it. I've already sent a discreet message to Director Hayes, Isabella replied. He's agreed to meet with us privately after the gala tonight. But, Alexander, we need to consider the possibility that Victoria will try to present her evidence publicly at the gala. Alexander resumed pacing, his mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. If she accuses you of treason in front of the assembled guests, the damage to the monarchy could be irreparable regardless of whether we can later prove the evidence was falsified. That's exactly what she's counting on, Isabella agreed. The initial shock and confusion would be enough to force my abdication before the truth could emerge. The king stopped pacing and looked directly at his wife. What do you want to do? We could cancel the gala, claim a security concern, or sudden illness. Isabella shook her head. Canceling would only delay the inevitable. Victoria would find another opportunity, and by then, she might have additional fabricated evidence or other supporters recruited to her cause. Better to face this tonight, when we know what's coming. You want to walk into her trap deliberately? I want to turn her trap against her, Isabella corrected. We have the recording of her admitting to fabrication and conspiracy. If she presents her false evidence tonight, we can immediately counter with proof of her lies. Alexander considered this strategy. It's risky. Once accusations of treason are made public, even if we prove they're false, some doubt will always remain. The alternative is allowing Victoria to control the timing and circumstances of her attack, Isabella pointed out. At least tonight, we'll be prepared. The king nodded slowly. What about Lord Edmund? The recording makes it clear he's part of this conspiracy. I've been thinking about that, Isabella said. Edmund seemed uncertain on the recording, almost reluctant. He might be more follower than leader in this plot. Or he might be playing a deeper game, Alexander warned. We can't assume anyone is innocent at this point. Isabella pulled a folder from her briefcase. I've been reviewing our most trusted staff members and advisors. Sarah seems genuinely loyal, but Victoria has had access to her through official channels. Captain Morrison has always been professional, but Victoria met with him privately about tonight's security. We need to assume that anyone Victoria has had recent contact with could be compromised, Alexander said grimly, either through bribery, blackmail, or simply being deceived about the true situation. The afternoon wore on as the royal couple planned their strategy for the evening. They decided to proceed with the gala as scheduled, but with several discreet modifications to Victoria's security arrangements. Alexander would personally brief a small team of his most trusted guards, while Isabella would ensure that certain key allies among the guests were prepared for potential disruption. There's something else we need to discuss, Isabella said as they finalized their plans. If Victoria's plot succeeds tonight, if she somehow manages to force my abdication despite our preparations, what will you do? Alexander looked at his wife with surprise. Fight to clear your name and restore you to the throne, obviously. But what if the evidence against me becomes overwhelmingly convincing to others? What if Victoria has prepared backup plans we haven't considered? The king took his wife's hands in his own. Isabella, 15 years ago I married you not just for political alliance, but because I recognized in you the intelligence, integrity, and strength that would make you a great queen. Nothing Victoria or anyone else could fabricate would change my knowledge of who you truly are. Isabella felt tears threaten for the first time since discovering Victoria's betrayal. She said you were more devoted to duty than to love. She's counting on that assumption to manipulate your response. Then, she's made a fatal error in judgment, Alexander said firmly. My duty as king is to protect the crown from all threats, including those from within our own circle. My duty as a husband is to stand by the woman I love. Tonight, those duties aligned perfectly. As evening approached, Isabella began preparing for the charity gala with unusual care. Every detail of her appearance would be scrutinized if Victoria carried out her plan, and the Queen wanted to project strength and dignity regardless of what transpired. She chose a midnight blue gown embroidered with silver thread, elegant, but not ostentatious. The crown jewels would send the right message about her confidence in her position, while her grandmother's sapphire earrings provided personal strength. Sarah arrived to assist with final preparations, her demeanor professional as always. Isabella watched her secretary carefully, looking for any signs of nervous behavior or divided loyalties. But Sarah's manner remained unchanged. Your Majesty, the guest list for this evening shows over 200 attendees, Sarah reported. The largest turnout for the Children's Hospital charity in 5 years. Isabella wondered how many of those guests had been deliberately invited by Victoria to serve as witnesses to whatever drama she planned to unfold. The irony that a charity event for children might become the stage for destroying a queen was not lost on her. Has Lady Victoria mentioned anything unusual about tonight's proceedings? Isabella asked casually. Nothing specific, Your Majesty, though she did seem quite focused on the timing of various speeches and presentations. She spent considerable time reviewing the evening's schedule. Another piece of evidence supporting Isabella's theory that Victoria had carefully choreographed whatever public confrontation she was planning. The timing of accusations would be crucial to maximizing their impact and minimizing the opportunity for immediate rebuttal. Alexander arrived at Isabella's chambers as she was completing her preparations. The king looked magnificent in his formal dress uniform, the gold braid and medals catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. Despite the gravity of their situation, Isabella felt a surge of pride in her husband's bearing and resolve. Are you ready for this? Alexander asked, offering his arm. As ready as anyone can be for their closest friend to attempt their destruction, Isabella replied with a wry smile. But, yes, I'm ready. As they walked through the palace corridors toward the grand ballroom, Isabella reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought them to this moment. She had awakened yesterday morning as a queen secure in her position and surrounded by trusted allies. Tonight, she would attend a charity gala not knowing whether she would still wear the crown by morning. The sounds of the gathering guests grew louder as they approached the ballroom. Orchestra music drifted through the halls, mixed with the conversation and laughter of the assembled nobility and dignitaries. To any observer, it would appear to be a typical royal charity event, elegant and dignified. But Isabella knew that somewhere among those well-dressed guests, Lady Victoria Ashford was preparing to unleash a carefully planned attack that would either destroy a queen or expose a conspiracy. The next few hours would determine which outcome prevailed, and Isabella steeled herself for the battle of her life. The grand ballroom of Ravencrest Palace had been transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and philanthropy. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across the marble floors, while elaborate floral arrangements adorned every table. The cream of society mingled beneath portraits of ancient monarchs, their jewels sparkling as they discussed business, politics, and charity over champagne and canapes. Queen Isabella entered the ballroom on King Alexander's arm, acknowledging the respectful bows and curtsies of their guests with practiced grace. Her midnight blue gown rustled softly as they moved through the crowd, stopping to exchange pleasantries with various dignitaries and benefactors. Isabella's trained eye quickly identified the guests that Victoria had added to the list. Lord Edmund Blackwood stood near the orchestra, deep in conversation with several members of Parliament known for their criticism of recent royal policies. Lady Margaret Thornton, whose newspaper had published unflattering articles about the monarchy's expenses, chatted animatedly with the Duchess of Westmere, a woman whose family had lost significant influence during Alexander's reforms. She's assembled quite an audience, Alexander murmured discreetly as they paused to greet the ambassador from neighboring Algeria. Look at their positioning, Isabella observed quietly. They're strategically placed throughout the room to ensure maximum visibility for whatever spectacle Victoria has planned. Lady Victoria herself held court near the main entrance, resplendent in emerald silk that complemented her silver hair. She appeared every inch the devoted royal advisor, greeting guests with warmth and ensuring that the evening's charitable purpose remained at the forefront of conversations. Your Majesty, Victoria said, approaching with her characteristic gracious smile as Isabella and Alexander made their way toward the head table. You look absolutely radiant this evening. The midnight blue is particularly striking. Thank you, Victoria, Isabella replied, matching her advisor's warm tone while studying her face for any hint of the coldness she had heard on the recording. You've outdone yourself with the arrangements. The turnout is remarkable. The cause deserves nothing less, Victoria responded smoothly. The children's hospitals provide such vital services. I'm confident we'll exceed our fundraising goals tonight. Isabella noticed that Victoria's eyes betrayed a hint of nervous energy despite her composed exterior. The woman was clearly preparing for something significant, her attention periodically shifting to scan the room as if checking the positions of key players in whatever drama she had orchestrated. The evening proceeded with typical royal charity event protocol. Cocktails and conversation were followed by dinner, during which various speakers addressed the assembled guests about the important work being done by the children's hospitals. Isabella delivered her prepared remarks about the monarchy's commitment to supporting vulnerable children, receiving enthusiastic applause from the audience. As the dinner plates were cleared and the evening moved toward its formal conclusion, Isabella noticed increased activity among the guests Victoria had specifically invited. Several conversations ceased abruptly when she passed nearby, and there was an unmistakable sense of anticipation in the air. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria announced, rising from her seat as the dessert course concluded. Before we adjourn for the evening, I have an important matter to address that affects us all. Isabella felt her heart rate increase as Victoria's moment finally arrived. Alexander's hand found hers beneath the table, offering silent support as they prepared to face whatever accusations were about to be made public. As many of you know, Victoria continued, her voice carrying clearly through the ornate ballroom. I have had the honor of serving as advisor to their majesties for over a decade. In that capacity, I am sometimes made aware of information that is difficult to share, but necessary for the protection of our monarchy. The room fell silent, the earlier festive atmosphere replaced by tension as guests sensed something significant was about to unfold. Isabella could see various nobles leaning forward in their chairs, eager to witness whatever revelation Victoria was building toward. Unfortunately, I have recently discovered evidence of financial irregularities that appear to involve someone very close to the crown, Victoria announced, her tone heavy with regret. Bank records and correspondence have come to light suggesting that substantial sums have been transferred to organizations seeking to undermine our monarchy. Gasps echoed through the ballroom as Victoria's words hit their intended target. Isabella remained perfectly still, her years of diplomatic training allowing her to maintain composure even as she felt the eyes of 200 guests upon her. These are serious allegations, Lady Victoria, Alexander said, rising from his seat with carefully controlled authority. I trust you have substantial evidence to support such claims. Indeed I do, Your Majesty, Victoria replied, producing the manila folder she had shown Isabella that morning. Bank statements, correspondence, and transfer records that paint a deeply troubling picture. Lord Edmund Blackwood stepped forward from his position near the orchestra, his face grave with apparent concern. Your Majesties, if I may, these allegations cannot be taken lightly. The evidence Lady Victoria has uncovered requires immediate investigation. Isabella recognized this as the coordinated attack she had expected. Victoria and Edmund were working together to create a sense of urgency and legitimacy around their fabricated accusations. You're absolutely right, Lord Edmund, Isabella said, rising gracefully from her chair. These allegations are so serious that they demand immediate and thorough investigation by proper authorities. Victoria's confident expression flickered slightly at Isabella's calm response. Clearly, she had expected protests of innocence or emotional denials that would appear guilty to the assembled witnesses. Which is why, Isabella continued, I have already requested that the Royal Investigation Bureau conduct a comprehensive examination of all financial records and documents related to these claims. The Queen gestured to a man who had been standing discreetly near the ballroom entrance. Director Hayes of the Royal Investigation Bureau stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention from the assembled guests. Director Hayes arrived this afternoon at my request, Isabella announced. He has agreed to begin his investigation immediately, with full access to all relevant records and complete independence in his findings. Victoria's face went pale as she realized that her carefully planned ambush was being turned against her. The presence of the RIB director transformed the situation from a public accusation into a formal investigation, complete with professional oversight. Furthermore, Alexander added, moving to stand beside his wife. Director Hayes has informed us that preliminary examination of the documents provided by Lady Victoria reveals several irregularities that suggest possible fabrication. The murmur that went through the crowd was audible as guests began to understand that they were witnessing not the downfall of a queen, but the exposure of a conspiracy. Lord Edmund's face grew ashen as he realized the trap was closing around the conspirators rather than their intended victim. "That's impossible," Victoria said, her composure finally cracking. "Those documents are authentic. I obtained them through official channels." Director Hayes stepped forward, his voice professionally neutral. "Lady Victoria, our forensic document experts have identified several inconsistencies in paper composition, ink analysis, and digital formatting that indicate sophisticated forgery. We will, of course, conduct a complete investigation, but the preliminary evidence strongly suggests fabrication." Isabella watched as Victoria's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The woman who had been her closest friend and advisor for over a decade was finally revealed in her true colors, and the sight was both satisfying and deeply painful. Additionally, Isabella said, producing her own recording device, "I have evidence that may be relevant to Director Hayes's investigation." She pressed play, and Victoria's voice filled the ballroom with its recorded confession to conspiracy and fabrication. The reaction from the assembled guests was immediate and dramatic, with shocked exclamations and angry murmurs rippling through the crowd. The recording clearly documents Lady Victoria's admission to fabricating evidence and conspiring to force my abdication, Isabella announced as the recording concluded. It also implicates Lord Edmund Blackwood in this conspiracy against the crown. Lord Edmund attempted to flee toward the nearest exit, but found his path blocked by palace guards who had been discreetly positioned throughout the room. His face was a mask of panic as he realized there would be no escape from the consequences of his actions. "This is preposterous," Victoria said desperately, her voice rising as she grasped for any remaining shred of credibility. "That recording could easily be fabricated using modern technology. You have no proof of its authenticity." "Actually, we do," Director Hayes replied calmly. "The recording device was examined by our technical experts this afternoon. Voice analysis confirms that it is indeed your voice, Lady Victoria, and technical analysis indicates no evidence of digital manipulation." The weight of evidence was crushing Victoria's remaining defenses. Her face cycled through emotions from defiance to desperation to resignation as she realized that her conspiracy had not only failed but had been turned completely against her. "Your Majesties," Victoria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can explain everything. There were circumstances, pressures that you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Isabella replied, her voice filled with the pain of betrayal. "You believe that your own ambition was more important than 15 years of friendship, loyalty, and service to the crown. You were willing to destroy me with lies to advance your own agenda." The Queen turned to address the assembled guests, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that you have been unwitting witnesses to this conspiracy against the crown. However, your presence here tonight serves an important purpose. You can testify that justice will be served, and that the monarchy remains strong in the face of threats from within our own circle." Applause began slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation as the guests realized they were applauding not just the Queen's survival, but the triumph of truth over deception. Many of the nobles who had been carefully positioned by Victoria to witness her supposed downfall were now witnessing her exposure and defeat instead. As palace guards moved to escort Victoria and Lord Edmund from the ballroom, Isabella felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at having survived the conspiracy was mixed with sadness at losing someone she had considered a dear friend. The betrayal would leave scars that time might heal, but would never completely erase. Alexander placed his arm around his wife's shoulders as they watched their former advisor being led away. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I will be," Isabella replied, leaning into her husband's embrace. "The crown survives, our marriage survives, and justice prevails. Tonight, that's enough." The charity gala concluded on a note of triumph rather than tragedy, with guests expressing their support for the royal couple and their admiration for how the conspiracy had been handled. The evening that was supposed to end Queen Isabella's reign had instead strengthened her position and exposed the enemies within her own court. 3 weeks after the dramatic exposure of Lady Victoria's conspiracy, Queen Isabella stood in her private study, reviewing the final report from the Royal Investigation Bureau. The autumn sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed brighter somehow, as if the removal of deception from her life had cleared the air itself. Director Hayes had been thorough in his investigation, uncovering a web of corruption that extended far beyond what Isabella had initially discovered. Victoria's conspiracy had been years in the making, involving not just the fabrication of evidence against the Queen, but the systematic placement of her allies in key positions throughout the royal administration. The scope of her network is astounding, Alexander said, reading over his wife's shoulder. Treasury officials, palace staff, even members of parliament. She was building her own shadow government within our administration. Isabella turned a page in the report, revealing financial records that showed Victoria had been embezzling funds from various royal charities to finance her political activities. The irony that the Children's Hospital Charity Gala had been funded partially through Victoria's own theft was not lost on the Queen. She was patient, Isabella observed, moving slowly, building relationships, gathering compromising information on key individuals. If she hadn't become overconfident and moved too quickly against me, she might have succeeded in her eventual goal of controlling the monarchy entirely. The investigation had revealed Victoria's ultimate objective, not just Isabella's removal, but the gradual manipulation of Alexander into a figurehead king, while Victoria wielded real power through her network of allies and compromised officials. The fabricated evidence against Isabella had been only the first step in a much larger plan. A knock at the study door interrupted their reading. "Enter," Isabella called, looking up to see Sarah approaching with her usual professional demeanor, though the events of recent weeks had clearly affected her deeply. "Your Majesty, the Minister of Justice has arrived for your meeting," Sarah reported. "He's waiting in the blue salon." "Thank you, Sarah," Isabella replied. "Please ask him to join us here instead. This matter requires the utmost privacy." As Sarah departed, Alexander set aside the investigation report and moved to pour tea from the service that had been prepared earlier. The domestic normalcy of the action provided a welcome contrast to the weighty matters they had been discussing. Minister James Crawford entered the study with a serious expression that had become characteristic of him since Victoria's arrest. As the official responsible for prosecuting the conspiracy case, he had been working around the clock to ensure that justice was properly served. "Your Majesties," Crawford said, accepting the offered seat across from their chairs. "I have updates on the legal proceedings that I felt you should hear directly." "How is the case progressing?" Alexander asked, settling back into his chair with his teacup. "Lady Victoria has agreed to cooperate fully with our investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence," Crawford reported. "She's provided detailed information about her entire network, including methods of recruitment and the specific compromises she held over various officials." Isabella felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness at this news. Victoria's cooperation would ensure that all aspects of the conspiracy were exposed and that justice was served. But it also represented the final destruction of a relationship that had once meant so much to the Queen. "What about Lord Edmund?" Alexander inquired. "Lord Edmund's situation is more complicated," Crawford replied grimly. "He claims he was being blackmailed by Lady Victoria, who had obtained evidence of financial irregularities in his management of certain royal investments. His lawyers are arguing that he was a victim of coercion rather than a willing conspirator." Isabella considered this development carefully. The recording she had obtained did suggest that Edmund had been reluctant about Victoria's plan, though his ultimate participation in the conspiracy was undeniable. "What evidence exists to support his blackmail claims?" she asked. "Substantial evidence, unfortunately," Crawford admitted. "Victoria did indeed have compromising financial information about Lord Edmund, and she appears to have used it to force his cooperation. However, the law is clear that coercion does not excuse treason, even if it explains the motivation." The complexities of the legal system frustrated Isabella, but she understood the importance of ensuring that justice was both thorough and fair. The monarchy's credibility depended on being seen as above reproach in its handling of the conspiracy. "What sentence are we looking at for both of them?" Alexander asked. "Lady Victoria is likely facing 15 to 20 years in prison, even with her cooperation," Crawford explained. "Lord Edmund, if his coercion defense is accepted, might receive a lighter sentence of 10 to 12 years. But he will certainly face significant prison time." Isabella stood and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where autumn was giving way to early winter. The bare branches of the trees reminded her of the stark reality that had emerged from the investigation, all pretense stripped away to reveal the truth beneath. "Minister Crawford," she said without turning from the window, "I want to ensure that all of Victoria's victims within the royal administration are given the opportunity to come forward without fear of retaliation. Some of these people may have been coerced into cooperation, just as Lord Edmund claims to have been. I've already established a confidential reporting system for exactly that purpose," Crawford replied. "Several staff members have already come forward with information about pressure or blackmail they experienced. We're treating each case individually to determine appropriate responses." Alexander joined his wife at the window, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. "How many people were compromised by Victoria's network?" "At least 30 individuals that we've identified so far," Crawford answered. "Some were willing participants who shared Victoria's political views. Others were coerced through various means, and still others were simply deceived about her true intentions." The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Isabella realized that virtually every aspect of royal administration had been touched by Victoria's influence, from financial management to security protocols to diplomatic communications. "What safeguards are we implementing to prevent something like this from happening again?" Isabella asked, turning back to face the minister. Crawford consulted his notes before responding. "We're implementing several new security measures. Enhanced background checks for all senior staff, regular financial audits of royal accounts, and improved communication protocols to ensure that no single individual has excessive access to sensitive information. Additionally," Alexander added, "we're creating a new position of internal security advisor who will report directly to both of us, and will be responsible for monitoring potential threats from within the royal administration." Isabella nodded approvingly. The new measures would make the monarchy more secure, though they would also make the atmosphere within the palace more formal and less trusting. The innocent days of relying solely on personal loyalty and long-time relationships were over. "There's one more matter we need to discuss," Crawford said hesitantly. "The public response to recent events." "What kind of response?" Isabella asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Mixed, Your Majesty. Many people are expressing support for how you handled the conspiracy and admiration for your courage in facing down the threat. However, some are questioning how such an extensive conspiracy could develop without being detected earlier." The criticism stung, though Isabella recognized its validity. As queen, she bore ultimate responsibility for the security of the monarchy, and Victoria's conspiracy had developed under her watch over several years. "What are the editorial opinions in the major newspapers?" Alexander asked. "Generally supportive," Crawford replied. "Most praise Your Majesties for exposing the conspiracy and handling the situation with dignity. However, there are calls for greater transparency in royal administration and some criticism of the insularity that allowed Victoria to operate undetected for so long." Isabella absorbed this information with the stoicism that 15 years of royal life had taught her. Public criticism was inevitable in any major crisis, and she had learned to focus on justified concerns while ignoring politically motivated attacks. "Draft a response outlining the new security measures we're implementing," she instructed Crawford. "Make it clear that we take full responsibility for the security lapses that allowed this conspiracy to develop, and that we're taking concrete steps to prevent future occurrences." "Of course, Your Majesty." After Crawford departed, Isabella and Alexander remained in the study, processing the continuing revelations about Victoria's conspiracy. The investigation was winding down, but the implications would continue to shape their reign for years to come. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if that anonymous messenger hadn't delivered the recording?" Alexander asked thoughtfully. Isabella considered the question seriously. Victoria's plan might well have succeeded. The fabricated evidence was sophisticated, and her network was extensive enough that she could have controlled the narrative effectively. "Who do you think sent the recording?" "I've wondered about that constantly," Isabella admitted. "Someone within Victoria's network who developed second thoughts, perhaps. Or someone she had wronged who decided to seek revenge. Director Hayes says the messenger was a professional, probably hired through intermediaries, so we may never know the true source." Alexander moved to his desk and withdrew a letter from the locked drawer. "This arrived by special courier this morning. It might interest you." Isabella accepted the letter, recognizing the official seal of the Kingdom of Valdoria. Inside was a message from her exiled brother Marcus, written in his characteristic blend of formality and warmth. "Dearest sister," the letter began, News of your recent triumph over the conspiracy has reached even this distant corner of Europe, and I wanted to express my admiration for your courage and wisdom in handling such a treacherous situation. Your victory validates everything I tried to tell you about the dangers of court politics, though I take no pleasure in being proven right at such personal cost to you. I have given considerable thought to whether I might have been able to provide warning about Lady Victoria's true nature, but I confess that her deception was so complete that even my cynical perspective might not have penetrated it. She played her role as loyal advisor with masterful skill. Please know that if you ever have need of an ally outside the formal diplomatic channels, I remain your devoted brother and will always stand ready to support you and Alexander in whatever way I can. The crown may make us targets, but family bonds endure beyond political machinations. With love and respect, Marcus. Isabella folded the letter carefully, feeling a renewed connection to her brother. His experience with betrayal and exile had given him wisdom that might prove valuable in the years ahead. Are you considering inviting Marcus to return from exile? Alexander asked, having read the letter over her shoulder. Not immediately, Isabella replied. But his perspective on court politics has proven valuable, and there may come a time when we need allies who understand the depths to which ambitious people will sink. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set as Isabella and Alexander concluded their review of the conspiracy's aftermath. The immediate crisis had passed, justice was being served, and new safeguards were being implemented. The monarchy would emerge from this trial stronger and more secure, though forever changed by the experience. As they prepared to leave the study for dinner, Isabella paused to look once more at the investigation report. Victoria's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also taught valuable lessons about the price of trust and the importance of vigilance in positions of power. The Queen closed the report and locked it away, ready to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new responsibilities, but tonight, she was simply grateful to have survived the greatest threat her reign had yet faced, with her crown, her marriage, and her integrity intact.